Leaders' questions, and a call on Deputy Dara Calleary, who has 3 minutes.
Thank you, Laskin Curler. Tánaiste, over the past number of months, we've witnessed a number of very high-profile and worrying criminal events across the country that are causing great concern. We had the raft of ATM thefts on both sides of the border. And secondly, we've had the insidious evidence of an increase in gang activity and drug-related activity in Drogheda in particular. The Garda Armed Response Unit had to be brought into Drogheda, and it turned out that Drogheda had been left short of Gardaí for the past year, so the criminal activity was allowed to fester in the context of that particular shortness. And Drogheda, as we all know, is a fantastic town. I had the pleasure of visiting it last year during last year's FLA, and the welcome was phenomenal. And the people of Drogheda took charge of their own destiny by having a very dignified and silent protest, calling on criminal gangs to step back and calling for action to protect their town and protect the people of their town. And criminal gangs and others involved in the drug trade are spreading their malignant activity across the country, Tánaiste, as pressure comes on them here in this city. And people in towns and indeed villages and small communities across the country are getting justifiably concerned about this activity and justifiably concerned about the poor and slow response to what's happening. Last night we saw the reports in RTE from Longford, where once again a small and a proud town has had to have the Garda Armed Reserve on duty on its streets as we speak. There have been 4 stabbings, 43 violent incidents and 2 arson attacks over the past number of months. And people are worried, they're concerned and they're fed up. This morning the GRA did an interview with Morning Ireland, and they spoke about Gardaí not being able to actively engaging with the feud because they are, to quote a phrase, operating a fire brigade service, going from call to call. The force is operating on very tight overtime budget. There simply aren't enough Gardaí patrolling the streets. The only answer is there needs to be guards on the street in their faces so they can't behave like that. That is the view of the GRA, the people who represent the Gardaí on the street. That's Longford, that's Drogheda. Tánaiste, are there other towns? Are there other communities that are going to have the Armed Response Unit on their streets over the next few weeks? And what, Tánaiste, is the government doing to actively engage with these problems before they require that level of response? What are you doing to prevent eruptions of gang violence around the country before communities are terrorised, before people are threatened in their own communities? And do you believe that there's extra resources needed to tackle this around the country?
Thanks, Deputy, for raising this issue. And I am, of course, aware of reports about a number of violent and public order incidents that have occurred in Longford in recent weeks. And while I'm not in a position to discuss specific details about Garda operations in the area, I can assure the House that Gardaí will not permit a small number of individuals, in this case families that are feuding, to put local communities in fear for their own safety. Criminal acts of this nature have no place in civilised society, and in Garda Síochána are determined to bring the perpetrators of these acts to justice as soon as possible, but also to protect and reassure the broader communities as well. The House will be aware that the Garda Commissioner and his management team are solely responsible for the allocation of Garda resources, including personnel, with regard for new and emerging crime trends. Neither the Government nor the Minister for Justice are permitted to intervene in Garda operational matters, and we shouldn't. But we do have a responsibility to make sure that the resources are available to the Garda Commissioner and his teams to make sure that they can respond appropriately. The Government has made unprecedented resources available to Garda Síochána. Budget 2019 saw the allocation of €1.76 billion to the Gardaí to help them carry out their vital functions. In December 2018, the Government endorsed the report of the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland, accepting all 157 recommendations. A 4-year high-level implementation plan was also published, with progress being overseen by a dedicated programme office in the Department of the Taoiseach. There is a considerable amount of work to be done, including drafting new policing legislation, which will ensure that the broader concept of community safety will be embedded in statute. Key to this is policing in partnership with communities. and with other departments and agencies who provide essential services and supports to communities and individuals who are at risk. The Garda recruitment campaign is currently underway, which will ensure that Garda Síochána remains on target to reach the target of 15,000 sworn members by 2021. The number of sworn Gardaí is now in excess of 14,000, with 200 more Gardaí having attested on the 7th of June. A further 200 will attest before the end of this year. So, Deputy, I share your concern. We do need to ensure that the Guards are resourced to respond to new criminal threats, whether that's gangland crime, whether it's families feuding, and to ensure that the necessary resources and skills are available from a training perspective and an equipment perspective for Garda Síochána. But the allocation and the planning on the ground has got to be something that comes from the Garda Commissioner.
I got 1 minute, Deputy.
Thank you, Tánaiste. I fully accept that operational issues are a role for the Garda Commissioner. But when the case of Drogheda, an extra Gardaí were assigned there, Minister Flanagan and the local Fine Gael deputy made sure that they were there for the press conference and for the picture. But they had to be assigned after the events took off. They have to be assigned after the problem took hold. And we're talking about Drogheda and Longford today, two fine communities, but there are communities right across the country that are living in fear, low-level antisocial behaviour, right up to drug and criminal gang activity, and they don't want to be the next town that has the armed support unit. So there needs to be proactivity on the part of the Minister and on the part of the Government, whilst respecting the line and respecting that operational issues are a matter for the Commissioner. We need proactivity from Government and Minister Flanagan to respond to concerns in communities around the country as they see their own community being targeted by gangs, they see their own families on day-to-day activity, and they don't want to be the next town that has the armed support unit. So what I would say to you is proactivity at cabinet level, working with the Commissioner, is what we need, not kind of false promises or false issues about legislation.
Tánaiste, 1 minute.
Deputy, I think you have accused this government of many things, but I don't think it's credible to accuse the government of not being open to new thinking, better policing, new ways of doing things from a policing perspective. There has been a constant programme of reform and reassessment and independent assessment of policing in Ireland for obvious reasons over the last number of years, and that continues. And the resources continue to increase too. The number of guards also continue to increase, which is needed, not just in Longford or Drogheda, but in many other parts of the country as well, and in many of our constituencies, as we know only too well. The presence of the Minister with the Garda Commissioner at times of stress and fear in towns like Drogheda in response to gangland crime is more than appropriate to reassure people that right at the top of government we can understand the concerns and the need for a response here. But the actual response itself does need to be designed by police officers in Garda Síochána and in the Garda Commissioner's office. And if the Garda Commissioner needs more resources or stronger legislation in certain areas, well, then he will get both. And that is the kind of relationship that is needed between the Garda Commissioner and the Minister for Justice, which is a very strong one.
Deputy.